Hello and welcome to Series 5 of Autism in Conversation with Auticon, a podcast from Auticon, the largest autistic majority company in the world. The podcast aims to help raise greater understanding and appreciation of neurodiversity through fascinating conversations with fantastic guests. Hosted by me, Carrie, MBE, each episode will feature inspirational guests from all walks of life who each share a passion for making the world more inclusive. We'll be talking about the many benefits of hiring neurodivergent talent, through to some of the more common challenges faced by autistic adults, navigating the workplace, plus so much more. All of my 4 children are neurodivergent, and in January 2023, I received my own autism diagnosis as well. So this is a subject I'm incredibly passionate about. I'm really looking forward to facilitating some great conversations about autism and all things neurodiversity. Hopefully, we can all learn something new along the way and maybe even be inspired to do something new or different ourselves. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. I'm thrilled to be hosting this episode today because it's all about autistic talent, what that means, what that looks like, how we celebrate it, and how we nurture it. Wonderful stuff. Even more exciting is that I'm joined by an incredible panel of guests. They know all about autistic talent, and we'll be hearing from them as they share their experiences in just a moment. Let me introduce them. First up is Ben Branson, who's founder of Seedlip, Pollen Projects, and the Hidden 20%, the podcast, which is brilliant. Just give it a bit of a plug there. Next, we have dancer and TV personality Tom Malone Jr. And then finally, our very own Steve Hill, Chief Commercial Officer for UK and Ireland at Auticon. Welcome, everybody. I am really excited about this episode because so often when people talk about autism, it's spoken of in such a negative way. And something that I really want us to just drill down into today is just some of the benefits, some of the ways that we think that mean that actually there are capabilities that we can go into spaces that perhaps neurotypical people don't have those same way of thinking. We know they don't. So let's get down to business. Let's find out first how you got your diagnosis of autism. Tom, first you.
So I was late diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 28. And it wasn't until... Well, I'd always felt sort of different to everyone else, but I wasn't sure why. I never fit the stereotypes of autism, so I never considered that could be what was going on. And then it wasn't until one of my nephews was displaying all the same traits that I displayed as a child, and he was suspected of having autism. So at that point, I got diagnosed. I wanted to be sort of someone that he could talk to about things that I didn't have when I was a kid. Yeah. So yeah, up until being 28, I was completely undiagnosed.
So that's relatively recently. I know I got my diagnosis just last year. And for you, Tom, what was it like when you look back on your childhood? You know, you're talking about your nephew there, going through school. You did all of that without any help. How do you feel when you look back at that little child, little Tom?
There's an element of... I see it both ways. I see a side where I think, there was so much access to resources and to, like, if I was able to understand the things that I was struggling with at a deeper level, I would have had access to better coping mechanisms for those things. But at the same time, I think it allowed me to also never have excuses to not do things I wanted to do. So I think there's both benefits and negatives to going undiagnosed as a child. So I kind of just have to accept my lot. Like that's what I had, and everyone has a different experience, and I just kind of have to accept that.
Yeah, but sometimes, particularly boys, are thought of as you're just naughty, or you're just because you're not like the other kids. So then you get labelled with something that is such a negative label. You've then got to try and process that label. Was that your experience?
Yeah, very much so. Less so naughty, but more kind of like, it was always very much that I would just do what I wanted to do and do my own thing. But then looking back at it, it was because if I was interested in something, I would hyper focus on that and kind of shut out everything else. So there was definitely times that I was seen as problematic in some ways that weren't necessarily true, seen as being like overly blunt and sometimes rude, but it was just because my communication style was very direct.
Tom, it's because it was true.
Yeah. Possibly.
It just wasn't said very nicely. And what about dance? Because obviously, well, I know I started out as a dancer, and for me, when I look at my childhood, I think, my gosh, dancing was my salvation. What age did you start dancing? When did you get into that?
I started dancing at 6, and it was never even really me that was meant to be dancing. My sister got taken to dance classes, and my mum had no one to watch me, so she just brought me along. And instead of sitting at the back quietly like I should have been, I just started joining in. So I've been dancing ever since. I don't actually remember a time in my life where I wasn't dancing. And I think having struggles with sort of communicating my emotions and stuff as a child, dance kind of gave me an outlet that I could express that in a way that felt more comfortable to me.
Tom, on these podcasts, we often talk about, for Auticon, people are going into environments that are very set and fixed. And yet when we look at your work, it's often abroad, it's in different spaces, it's in different places, it's in loud environments. That kind of flies in the face of everything we're told about autism. How do you deal with that?
I think I've found a very helpful way of coping with things for me is to just not expect things that I can't control. So when I know that in a lot of like creative spaces, things can change last minute, it doesn't feel like as much of a change if I'm expecting changes to happen. So because mentally I'm prepared for being in a spontaneous environment, that spontaneity is kind of expected. So it goes with the plan of what I've expected for the day. So for me, it makes no sense, but also makes perfect sense in my head. I'm just expecting spontaneous changes. So it doesn't feel like a change. It feels like it's what is expected. And then in terms of being like performing in loud spaces and different countries and big stages, again, like dance is something I've been passionate about from being young. It's very much one of my special interests and my hyper focuses. And when it comes to that, I think because I put myself in that environment where I'm comfortable, because I know it's something that I thrive in, I know it's something that I can do well, I don't feel a lot of expectation and pressure from other people beyond what I can deliver in terms of my talent. So there's less of a unsure like approach to it of not knowing if I'm going to be accepted, not knowing if I'm going to be taken the wrong way, because I know that I can deliver something to a high standard in that environment.
Yeah, that's so true. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I find, because I work in music, I can be in the studio listening to music all day long. I go home and the dog barks and I feel like I'm going to cry.
Absolutely. I think as well with music, and obviously dance is music most of the time as well, the rhythm and the patterns within the music are actually quite soothing rather than being like random, irritable noises.
That's a very good point. I need to pattern my dog. Ben, let's move to you. Your diagnosis was also late, right?
Yeah, 2022. And I only had one frame of reference probably for autism, which was the Rain Man, the one that everybody seems to have. And I definitely, if you'd have told me that I could have been, or mentioned it to me, I'd have, just said no way. Like that doesn't chime. That doesn't make any sense. I just wouldn't have identified with it because I had zero to kind of no knowledge about it. And now, I mean, I'm glad I'm autistic, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And I couldn't identify any more with it. Like, so I to get to, I'm 41 now, and to get to 39 and suddenly, the lights turn on. It's mostly amazing.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. So somewhere between your idea of Rain Man and going for an assessment, what was it that drove you to go and have the assessment then?
I think this has been a pattern throughout my life where I can actually take quite a long time to process things and quite a long time to think things through and digest things and absorb things. And
Relate.
yeah, and I so there are a couple of things, like minor little things that happened over the course of 2022. One was a guy I know in the drinks industry was diagnosed and was sort of fairly public about it. And he's a guy that I always enjoyed kind of talking to, and ended up sort of thinking, actually, I relate to quite a lot of what you're saying. And then I listened to a podcast, and I heard James Watt, who's the founder of Brewdog, him sort of talking a bit about how his brain works, and maybe he was going through an autism diagnosis, and these seeds were sort of sown. Um, but
Yeah.
this was at a time when, you know, I was about to have heart surgery. My third daughter was about to be born. Like, whether I was autistic or not was not really a priority. Um, but it over the course of 8 months, the seed was definitely sown to the point where I'm then Googling it, and I'm then doing a NHS sort of assessment test and scoring highly, and then going back into denial and thinking, no way, no way, this is not true. So yeah, it was sort of gradual. There was no one big moment. There was no sort of car crash to it. And yeah, and then I went through a 12-week process for the diagnosis, for the assessment. So it's actually very slow, very gradual.
Yeah. I think it's like that for many of us, that kind of gradual realization and also gradual acceptance or denial, or, you go through all those kind of emotions, and sometimes they sit alongside each other, which is, really is complicated, isn't it? Steve, you're the only non-autistic guest here on this particular episode. What's your connection to autism?
So, obviously, my role at Auticon, I spend a lot of my time with our clients and kind of in the orbit of neuro inclusion, particularly in the workplace. So, whether that's with IT leaders in terms of how we might be able to help augment their IT projects, or with HR professionals around neuro inclusion strategy. It's about evangelism, but I'm spending more time actually with senior leaders around the business case for neuro inclusion, and
What's
why
that?
there's well, it's basically around why there's much more to neuro inclusion than it just being, morally and ethically a good thing to do. There is very strong reasons why neuro inclusion, without sort of dropping into kind of business language, but it's really trying to answer the question ever so gracefully on behalf of large organizations. Why should they care? And it's around, the typical things, such as, increased profits, reduced costs through, losing people in the workplace because they're not supported. It's about cost avoidance, the opportunity cost, but overall, it's around the benefits of having a diverse team, giving you that opportunity to be much more competitive. And actually, it's not just about neuro inclusion. This is about being, the benefits to everybody.
Yeah.
And the benefits
Can I
that.
just push you on that a little then? So what are the benefits?
So in terms of neuro inclusion, a lot of the things that we talk about, relate to, I guess, the practical implications. So when we're working with a client on an IT project, we talk a lot about the things that can be seen day to day through the fact that we have a diagnosed and disclosed autistic individual as part of that team. So, quite often, we will talk about the benefits of things like logical analysis. The characteristics of logical analysis, pattern matching, error detection, periods of sustained concentration. And that's quite important because what we're trying to do is to bring this into a real life environment, and it's really around mitigation of fear and risk of not wanting to do or say the wrong thing. So it's by sort of working with clients in that kind of day-to-day practical environment that we can start to break down some of these preconceived notions. But also, it's about getting everyone on the same page, isn't it? It's a little bit like learning to swim by reading a book. Great education's fantastic, but there's nothing quite like jumping in and getting your feet wet. And that's very much the message that we promote.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about businesses. Tom, there's something, actually both of you probably would have a little bit of this, but this sense of a kind of portfolio career. Many autistic people, I don't have the stats to kind of back this up, but anecdotally, I meet so many people who aren't just doing the one thing. Autistic people generally, like, I did this, then I went off to the left, and then I ended up a couple of flights of stairs, and then I'm there, and then I've just jumped off and gone to level 2 again. And you're just like, wow, you've changed and done so many different things. Tom, how has we obviously know you from Gogglebox, but how has your career evolved, and how have you made and shaped that happening?
Well, yeah, growing up, dance was a massive hyper focus, like we was talking about before. So that was definitely the career I wanted to pursue. Worked for a lot of incredible people, danced for like Fergie, Rita Ora, Emily Sandé. And then, yeah, kind of, I got to a point where I got a little bit bored with the commercial industry, wanted to do more creative stuff. And during that process, the studio that I was teaching at the time, they were called up by the producers from Gogglebox, asked if they knew any families that would be good for it. They suggested our family. So then, like you said, went a bit left field there, started doing Gogglebox, so more reality TV stuff. During the process, was still dancing. I've always danced. Ended up leaving Gogglebox after 7 years. Did another few reality TV shows, a lot of social media stuff that I do now. And I still travel the world with my crew, Primal Instincts, and compete globally representing the UK.
Wow, that's so different, isn't it? And you're such a modern day star, in the sense that, you know, I always think about, having started out as a dancer and I'm a coach, vocal coach, it's really important, I think, to not just be a celebrity, but to actually do something. And you even though people came to know you mainly in its bulk way through Gogglebox, you have a skill there that you are super good at. And also, just you've gone from dancing for people to leading in your dancing and teaching in your dancing. So you're then branching out into these other areas of work. And what has that working life been like? Just navigating, I'm thinking about navigating telly being autistic, you know, navigating other choreographers telling you what to do being autistic. How has that panned out?
So it has both benefits and negatives, the same as anything else. I've always found it like quite tedious to do the networking side of things, because
me too.
I'm not the best with small talk. I'm not the best with when people are asking you questions, but you know they're just trying to like find out a little bit beyond that, and you're trying to navigate what you're actually wanting from me. Like all that kind of stuff was always a bit tedious. I think that's why one of the reasons I fell out of love with the commercial industry. But in terms of the creative side, I've always loved it. It's a way that it's the one place where thinking differently is actually a massive asset. So I've always loved it. I've always enjoyed it. In terms of teaching, it's actually really ironic. When I first started teaching, I wasn't diagnosed yet, and I always had a great rapport with all the autistic kids, and people were like, "Oh, you're so great with these kids." And then now that makes perfect sense. It's because we think in a very similar way. So yeah, I think
same here.
I think it's been an interesting
Ben,
ride.
For you, Ben, obviously it's funny because when I first was asked to appear on your podcast, I was like, Ben, and then I saw underneath your name on the email, it said Seedlip. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with Seedlip. Like literally, I am funding your mortgage right now. And so it was such a delight to come and meet you. So I was and continue to be very starstruck because I'm really I love talent. I absolutely love talented people. Ben, for you, like I'm trying to think, what does a little Ben Branson do when he's in school and that ends up making these drinks? Where's that path?
So I mean, look, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and yeah, I wasn't even thinking that far ahead. I think I was very inspired by the fact that all my family work for themselves. I was very inspired by the fact my great grandfather was an inventor. and an engineer. Very inspired that
There's
my
an
dad.
autistic family
There
right
you go. Very inspired by my dad, like him setting up his own business in the design world. I thought that was brilliant. And then, I come from 300 years of farming, so work ethic, nature. People don't think of farmers as entrepreneurs or business owners, but
It's
yeah,
true.
when you can't control the weather, you have to be entrepreneurial. You absolutely
Wow.
have to, because you've got to wait for things to grow. So that was sort of, I guess what was in me growing up. And then I left school, and I didn't want to go to university, and I definitely didn't want to go into a corporate world. I loved cooking, and I wanted to go and I wanted to be a chef at 18, 19. And that led me into this world of sort of flavor and technique and structure and time plans and all the bits that I kind of have now realized that I really like. Uh,
Yeah.
and then, you fast forward another load of years, and I'm not, drinks are just the output of what I make. And, but to me, it's more about process, and it's more about engineering and invention and seeing things a bit differently. And nobody had even thought about distilling non-alcoholic spirits, and that was back in 2013 when I first started playing, and it had nothing to do with drinks. It was about
Yeah.
me playing with stuff that I grew in my garden and bits of metal that you could heat up and literally make a raw material, a solid thing, into a liquid. And I guess I felt like a very simplistic genius, in the sense that I could take mint from my garden and I could turn it into a liquid that smelt and tasted like mint, just through this
Yeah.
process of distillation. I thought that was awesome, and that I just wanted to keep doing that. And now I'm doing, now I've built my own laboratory, and we're inventing, loads of new stuff, playing around with lots of different ingredients. But it's the creating, the making, the analytics, the process, all of that is way more exciting to me than bottles and selling and cocktails and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think that's the same for many of us. The end bit is kind of like, yeah, sure, that bit's going to happen, but it's the bit before that's so exciting. It is the word process is so right. Ben, what
Yeah.
about your working environment? Are you surrounded by neurotypicals, or is it quite diverse? What's it like?
My team is, so I sort of have two teams. I kind of have my sort of my drinks team, and then we have the charity and the Hidden 20% podcast team. And the majority is neurodivergent, and that's not actually necessarily by design. I think like attracts like, and I've noticed that since I was diagnosed, I mean, I don't really like hanging out with people, right? Let's just be clear on that. I am really antisocial. But I maybe framed another way. I really enjoy working with neurodivergent people, but
Yeah.
I need neurotypical's point of view. I need that sense check. We have to have that balance, and we have to have, yeah, everybody sort of has a different brain. So that's really important, that it's not an us versus them. That is absolutely not my goal anyway. But I work from home mainly because that's the environment in which, to coin your terminology, Carrie, like that's the environment I can thrive. And I do
Yeah.
as few meetings as possible. I try not to leave the house if I can help it. I like, yeah, wearing headphones. I sort of, I'm even more so now since my diagnosis, I'm really starting to like tune in on what works, what doesn't, because I have a little bit more of
Yeah.
an understanding of how my brain works. So I can say what I
Yeah.
need.
Without
And that's,
condemning yourself, it explains you, doesn't it?
it does. And I
Yeah.
am the kindest to myself that I've ever been, hands down.
Yeah, lovely. Because Ben, sometimes when Auticon are working with, different companies and the like, and they're a little bit fearful of that kind of individualistic approach. How do you work that out amongst your staff?
Yeah, I can understand that, especially amongst sort of institutions and where you're dealing with bigger companies or bigger institutions where it is very difficult to truthfully and genuinely cater to the individual. And if you start from a place of, well, look, everybody on the planet is different, full stop, regardless of how your brain works. We It's then difficult to kind of treat people like individuals, and bend to their wishes and adjust everything just for them, when actually that's not how the next person needs things to be. My approach actually is continuing my same approach pre-diagnosis, which is when I hire someone, I start with a couple of things. I start from 100% trust in that person, and 100% trust that I've made the right decision in hiring that person. Right? Why would you want to hire someone and then doubt you've made a good decision? And that's quite disarming for a lot of people, because I do verbally contract that with them. I do literally say to a new joiner, you have 100% of my trust, and I 100% believe that I've made the right decision hiring you. And that's quite disarming, but for the right people, incredibly empowering.
I'll say.
And number two, I say it's really simple. I don't care when you work, how you work, where you work. I just care that you get great work done. And that, for some people, is too much freedom. But for the right kind of people, and if I believe I've hired the right person, that's quite simple. It's very liberating, and they can get on. And so we don't do any internal email. We don't have WhatsApp groups. Everything is done on an app called Slack. We have very, very few meetings. And these are not things that are just for neurodivergent people. These are things that I believe benefit the business or the charity and benefit everybody. And I think the danger in society now is that everybody switches their head and starts going, oh my God, we've got to do everything for neurodivergent people, and we've got to make all these adjustments, and they might sue us or they might not be happy. And we lose the respect and great work from the neurotypicals. Actually, there are ways. Internal email, banning that is good for everybody, regardless of whether you're neurodivergent or not. And there are these win-wins. They just take a bit of thought, I think, and a bit of working out. But they do start from, how do you get the best out of human beings? And in my case, because my brain is built for efficiency and optimization, what's the best way of doing things fastest, most efficiently, and with the best outcome in mind? There's loads of other things, but there's a few.
Steve, can we talk about the types of jobs? Obviously, when we talk tech, I have, because I'm just like a singer and dancer, I have my own idea of what tech means, but you have a more detailed engineering idea of what tech means. So what kinds of jobs are the autistic people that you're working with? What kind of jobs are they going into?
So for the most part, in terms of IT, we tend to focus on kind of three main areas. And there's a little bit of design around that, insofar as the skills gap. So I guess over the last 3 years, we've sort of moved from quality assurance, testing, software design, software engineering into data. Data is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. The proliferation of data that we generate just in our own worlds around social media and all of that stuff. It really does lend itself to some of the things that we were talking about earlier, and some of the, I guess, some of the qualities that we see that comes with having maybe more of a STEM background, and so careers in data is just huge, and it's not just filling a skills gap. This isn't about us, whether we've got 5 consultants, 50, 500. This is much more about enablement and showing, not telling, as we sort of alluded to earlier. So we're very lucky in the sense that the data explosion and I guess the awareness around neurodiversity has sort of come together at the kind of same time in many ways. So a lot of our consultants will be data analysts, they will visualize data, they will work on artificial intelligence projects, both in the private and the public sector. So it's a fantastic career, Carrie. Honestly, it is just exploding. And that's, before you even start talking about cybersecurity and, forensic analysis, threat intelligence, all of that stuff, which kind of comes as part and parcel with the kind of data explosion. And we're on the cusp. We're on the cusp of Gen AI, with ChatGPT and derivatives thereof. We're on the verge of a next wave of technology, which is only going to help propel not just us, but people that are coming into technology, and hopefully we'll be there in a modest way to kind of to guide and to inform.
Perhaps this is probably controversial, but perhaps there's a sense of an evolution of neurotype, seeing as our types of brains seem to be more needed. Like the areas you've just talked about, that's where the whole of the future kind of is looking like it's going to lie, What do you think about that, Ben? Do you think that there seem to be loads of people being diagnosed?
There do, and you get the cynics and the skeptics coming out with the sort of maybe silliness, pithy kind of, everybody's autistic or everybody's ADHD, or and that's I think, and I'm not an expert, but everyone's just seeing it more. There's more awareness, and you see one video on social, guess what? The algorithm's going to throw you a whole load of others. So you're going to feel like you can't move for seeing it. And people are at a place where there's more late diagnosis and people are more willing to speak up and disclose that. And that's a really, really good thing. That's a really positive thing. I agree, Steve. I think there's never been a better time to hire autistic people, and there's never been a better need, certainly within tech. But I could apply that same thinking to the world of drinks and production and the technology involved in making drinks. I think there's a brilliant opportunity, even with how we work and the differences of not needing to go to the office all the time. All these little bits are adding up to creating, I think, just natural, intuitive evolutions of basically environments where autistic people can do amazing work. And I do fully agree that employing autistics is better for business, 100%.
Yeah. Now you mentioned something earlier, Ben, which you talked about your only perception of autism was Rain Man, and that was also my only perception whenever it was 20 odd years ago when my children started to get diagnosed. But now it feels sometimes like we've flipped the other way, and now autism is a superpower. Tom, what do you think about that?
I think it's one of those weird ones where it depends on the person. I think if you're speaking to young children who are struggling with being diagnosed and how they feel about it, absolutely explaining all the ways they can thrive and all the ways that, it's a benefit to them, and pointing out all these amazing people. Like you've got Anthony Hopkins, who's won Oscars, who's autistic, like pointing out these people to them and showing them that if they find the right thing that they're passionate about, they can excel in a way that a lot of people might not necessarily have the perseverance to, because they might not hyper-focus like we do. I think absolutely it's an amazing thing to show them that, but I think it's also important that we don't shy away from the fact that it is a disability, and that autistic people, although they might thrive in some areas, still have like very big like issues in other areas. So it's very important that we do highlight autistic excellence, but we also don't shy away from the fact that it's a disability. There's also this saying about it's not a disability, it's a different ability. And I think, it's a different ability in a lot of ways, but it's definitely a disability too, and it's okay to admit that, especially
Yeah.
when it kind of, to say it's a superpower also kind of refuses to acknowledge all the people that have got higher support needs, because there's a lot of people like ourselves that, you know, we can skate by. We might be able to navigate the world better than some of the people that have got higher support needs, that are non-speaking, that might need to have help 24/7, that might never get to leave their parents' home. And I think to say it's a superpower without acknowledging the other sides of autism completely disregards their experience.
Yeah, that's so well put. Thank you for that, Tom. What about for you, Ben? Superpower? How do we feel about that?
It's a really dangerous, loaded word, basically. I mean, I echo all of what you said, Tom, in the sense that there are abilities, there are talents, there are skills, and wow, even as a society, we haven't even talked about those properly. People don't even understand those. Um, we sort of do what we do, I guess, as human beings, and we take it to extremes. And so skills and talent and positives suddenly have to be superpowers. And I just think it's misleading. If people think that their abilities, and they qualify that as a superpower, then, obviously each to their own. But uh, it's a balance. And if we're going to say that, autistic people have superpowers, then we also need to say that neurotypical people have superpowers as well, because there's lots of amazing things that people who are not autistic
Exactly.
can do that we and I can't do. So we're sort of, I worry sometimes that we can just put this on a pedestal and kind of, oh, you're autistic, you're all right, because that's a superpower, isn't it? And that becomes really, really dangerous. Representation is obviously incredibly important. And, Tommy's saying, talking to kids who are neurodivergent or who are struggling, we interview so many people on the podcast that say they didn't see people like themselves, and therefore childhood or school was difficult. And the big hope now is that actually there are people that children can see that are succeeding, getting on with life, able to be themselves. And that becomes a really important message that, we can hand down to younger generations coming through. I certainly think about that for my kids, of what are they growing up believing now and seeing and understanding that I didn't when I grew up. So yeah, superpower, dangerous, but we don't need the word superpower, but we do need to say that there are positives as well as challenges.
Yeah, yeah. And Steve, when you're kind of not selling in, but you're trying to get people work, and you are talking about how talented they are. So would you say that the people that you're working with are the autistic people are superpowered?
Again, I agree with everything that Ben and Tom have just said, really. We tend to point out the cognitive strengths, and everyone's different. That's the point. So we go to great lengths to say that, everyone is different. We reference, the spiky profiles. And through that, we try and educate the fact that, the autism spectrum is not this kind of linear idea that maybe perhaps the word and description conjures up. So we try not to go too deep, but we try and educate in a way that actually then relates to the cognitive profiles that we share with our clients, to say, look, this is why. And you could argue that, everyone should have a cognitive profile when they're going for a job in the workplace. Just because someone's, great at pattern matching or error detection, it doesn't mean that they absolutely want to be, a cybersecurity analyst. There's lots of other reasons. We started in IT, we've sort of stayed in our lane, but ultimately, our vision, we'd love to get to the point where we're talking to lots of different employers about lots of different roles in lots of different sectors, and just saying, look, this person here is going to be great. And it might be, organizing, a row of displays in a shop floor. But because that attention to detail is there, and that understanding and that passion, which, Tom mentioned, But I think, fundamentally it's about everyone having, actually having that ability and that passion for the role that they're doing. And we are just trying to help that along a little bit in our own way.
What is spiky profile?
So the way that we sort of describe it is just drawing that comparison with the term autism spectrum. So that tends to conjure up, a linear description of, one end someone's not very autistic, and at the other end maybe a lot more autistic. So that's the first thing that we try and point out, that it's not like that. And so we tend to sort of describe the fact that if you have certain characteristics, on a scale radiating out in a circle, with the center being say 0 and the outer scale being 10, not to put numbers on it. And then you sort of, have that view around the cognitive abilities of that person in each of those strengths. And then you draw a line, you get a spiky type profile. That's the visual kind of description of how we describe it.
Yeah. I know sometimes my kids say, I'm not very autistic on Monday, but by Wednesday I might be really autistic. It's just like, yeah, I hate the high functioning thing. I'd rather call it neurotypical passing, because I feel like that kind of makes it, which has its real challenges and real privileges in both ways. Okay, let's go on to it's our final section. I was just looking for you guys to give a shout out to any organisation or people that you think are really doing well in this area, doing something brilliant. Tom, let's come to you first.
Definitely, I would say the National Autistic Society, which I'm actually an ambassador of, but I'm only an ambassador of it because I actually really believe in what they're doing. Like, from when I was first diagnosed, I was given a lot of resources from them, from the company that diagnosed me. And what they're doing is amazing. They do a great job of highlighting both adults and children with autism, both autistic excellence and also the ways that autistic people need to be supported more. And they just really advocate for the best for the autistic community. And they listen to the autistic community. They're not just a bunch of people doing their own thing and not allowing us to speak for ourselves. And I think that's amazing. So definitely.
Yeah, I love that, Tom. Yeah. I'm also an ambassador for them, so I really get it. They are just wonderful. Ben, how about for you? What are you seeing out there that you're like, wow, they're good?
I mean, I'm slightly biased because we've had her on the Hidden 20%, but Ellie Middleton and all of her, her book Unmasked, all of her work that she's doing specifically with the autistic community and a younger generation, and bringing people together, events, and really holding like the reins of a big community. I think she's just watching her just absolutely in her element and absolutely going for it and being herself and being really honest about the fact that in order to do what she's doing, she has to mask. But she also wants to talk about being autistic and the realities of that. And that's a real tension for her, which I know a lot of people can identify with, myself included. So, Ellie Middleton.
Great. Lovely. How about for you, Steve?
I'm going to verge on being gushy here, Carrie, and I'm just going to turn it round and say the three of you, and genuinely, Ben, the podcast, I'm such a big fan of, the in 20%. I mean, you've got amazing guests on there, and it's just so authentic. And likes of Kit Harington, Carrie, I know you've been on Ben's podcast as well. But the one that struck me the most was the interview with your wife. And I think, fundamentally, I feel like a bit of a gay crasher to this party sometimes, to be frank. But, the authenticity of that personal story is just incredible. And you too, Tom, again, I'm trying to save blushes all around here, but you guys are so in it every day in terms of the platforms that you have and the expression of just the language, the sentiment, the authenticity is just really humbling. To I honestly, I could go on and on, but really, thank you. I'm just a big fan of all three of you.
Thanks, Steve. We appreciate. Yeah, thank you. Right. We're just basking in all that glory now. And then one thing, we always ask this at the end of every podcast, if there is one thing that you'd like, or there's probably dozens of things, but if there's something you feel like in the next 10 years, I would like to see this to have changed. I'd like to see change in this area. Tom, what would that be for you?
I think it would be amazing if we got to a place where there was so much awareness and so much understanding of, firstly, how different all autistic people can be, and that we don't all fit the same stereotypes. We can literally be anyone you walk past in the street. And secondly, along with that is for us to not be like held to neurotypical standards. I think it's important to note that we are a different neurotype, and we should be held to standards of how we navigate the world and how we process information, rather than being held to like a neurotypical standard. It's like the saying of, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's never going to succeed. So I think, yeah, that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah. Hear to that one. Ben, how about for you?
Yeah, that's a great one. I probably have this fairly rose-tinted, very naive view of hopefully everybody that wants to be diagnosed, needs to be diagnosed, wants to self-diagnose, whatever, just everybody that's neurodivergent feeling like they can be themselves. That's I guess my big goal. And it's the irony of wanting to normalize something that's different is really maybe not so far as like, I'm autistic and someone says, so what? But that kind of like, it's really okay. And we can talk about that or not talk about that, right? It might not be very interesting, or it might be really interesting, but it not be a weird thing or a problem or a taboo or a stigma or something to be ashamed of. I think that would be an amazing place to get to.
Yeah, agreed with that too. Steve, in terms of Auticon, you're looking ahead at, the next few years. What have you guys got coming up?
I mean, just firstly, carrying on from what Ben was saying, we get asked this question, quite a lot, and actually we preempt it in terms of what our view of the future is. And we often say it's a world where we're not needed anymore. Nothing will make us happier in some respects, that we went out of business. And that's not trying to be flippant. That's the world has moved on such that, we're not needed in the workplace environment.
And I think mine would be, as it always is, belonging, that we sense that we belong. Belonging is so important. Thank you so much. My guests today have been Ben Branson, Tom Malone Jr. and Steve Hill. Thank you so much. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. If you'd like to know more about the podcast, would be interested in applying for a job as an Auticon consultant, or would like further information about how Auticon can help support your business to be more neuro-inclusive, please visit auticon.com/UK. Recording and production was by Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London. It was engineered by Alex Brown, edited by Billy Godfrey, and the music was by The Lethargies. That's all from us this time. Thanks again for listening, and bye for now.